Buddy, I'm going to go ahead and call tonight's work session to order. Can I get a roll call?
Counselor Hunter,
Here.
Counselor Nunnally,
Here.
Counselor Carlson, Counselor Gabrielle,
Here.
Counselor Graham,
Here.
Council President Graham tonight, Counselor Dowd,
Here.
Counselor Dahlman,
Here.
Counselor Fisher,
Here.
Mayor Johnson.
Thank you. I'm going to move into tonight's discussion. We have two items on tonight's work session. The first is the parking lot on 18th. And the second is a review of the police and fire impact fees. Mr. Russell.
Yeah, Council President, members of the council. First item, looking at requests received from the public related to the parking lot at 17th Street and First Avenue, and included the initial letter that came into council in the packet, even though I know we've heard public comment a couple of times. I talked a little bit about it when the topic came up at the budget work sessions and as it related to security, and talk a little bit about kind of our views on it. And, over this time in discussions with law enforcement and also looking at, the intent of those two parking lots that were built back there in 2000. And really, those were part of a council direction under a tax increment financing project to create some additional parking to ease congestion in that area, really for school events. That's primary purpose for those. So in reality, they don't serve much more of a public purpose outside of that, although we may get some people using them during the day. It's feasible that you'd have some carpooling emerge through those, and I think that's an important aspect. But like I say, and in the winter, they're used for snow storage, at least the southern one. So in looking at it, that's why I had mentioned I'd, make the recommendation to, that we don't see harm in alteration of the hours where parking is allowed in there. We did look at calls into the police department over the last 2 months. Only one individual has contacted the police department with complaints over that time period. We do know that that activity is occurring, though, with or without calls coming in. And again, as we've done in other areas, we look at, okay, what is the intent of this public space? Council didn't want it built so as a loitering aspect for 9 o'clock at night for any type of the activity that's been brought forward, is truly to do that parking aspect. And as I talked initially about it, we're looking for council direction as we have in some of those other areas of, so it's a public space, we're getting complaints about it, kind of want to get council's feedback. Doesn't take council action because in municipal ordinance is written, it's underneath the purview of the police department to manage the municipal parking lots. However, these issues do come up, and rather to then make them all different depending on individual things. I mean, it's sometimes good to get some council feedback and activity and discussion related to it. But as we look at it, we'd have no problem signing it even higher level than was requested. The request was for a 9 o'clock and to public use. We don't see any issue with it going to 7 o'clock, because then you just, stop that problem before it even occurs further into the night. And it's just that much easier to look at and enforce. Obviously, we'd retain that flexibility to manage any events that it was intended for in the area, be it the ones that are occurring now or potentially into the future. You may have additional usage with, the elementary school there may have a different events that use that for overflow parking, or Lakers Field perhaps would use that. So there may be other ideas, and we'd retain that flexibility as part of that and, would manage that accordingly. But, initially, what we'd suggest as part of discussion and to see if council has any objection to it is just change that from an 11 o'clock at night down to a 7 o'clock at night and re-sign it and manage it from that end. So that's kind of what our intent would be, but definitely want to get council conversation and feedback related to that as well.
Okay, thanks. Anything from the council? Mr. Hunter.
Thank you. So in terms of having the flexibility on the events, would the signage say 7 p.m. except for events, or how do you convey to the public that there's that flexibility is there, so people don't decide not to park there because they see the 7 p.m.
Well, sometimes when we have parking restrictions that are changed, even in the downtown, we'll bag them or do a temporary signage component. So all things that are easily manageable. How exactly we'd do that, we'd kind of leave the traffic signs and signals, but it's one of those things that, could definitely be managed, through signage change. And, some of that would be, communications with, the school district or some of that about what they anticipate or envision. But like definitely, football games, they go well past 9 o'clock at night. And depending on, circumstances of the game could go well past 11 o'clock. So like I say, that flexibility would happen, per that specific unit. And I say we would brainstorm what actual sign language would be, but the overall intent would be, that as a standard basis, those two lots would be closed at 7 o'clock. The danger of leaving the one lot to the north open is you'd probably just push that behavior to that one and have that same issue. And while it may not be just immediately adjacent to it, you're still going to create the same problems and disruptions that would be there. So we'd probably look at both of those lots being signed with that 7 o'clock as the ceiling of it, pending any type of event going on.
And then if there's not control of access that goes along with that, is there a risk that the activity will occur, the call to the police, by the time they get there, the folks are gone? And so
that's the same thing with any law we have. I mean, you're going to have that respective issue. We have parking lots in town, all across town, that may have that same issue going on. So it's one of those things that, you put a new regulation or expectation in. Generally, people get the hang of it real quick, and then be included in the routes on terms of patrol, and you do that enforcement without even the call coming in to get that change. And you usually see a good response in terms of enforcement activity, changing behavior.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have other parking lots that, do we have other parking lots that we have enforced time on?
11 p.m.
11 p.m.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think that kind of emerged as before I got here from same type of activity in the downtown area at nights on weekends.
Okay.
Just to follow up, a little bit off subject, but because there are other parking lots, the mall and the high school in particular, that I've heard similar complaints about, and obviously not in our jurisdiction. I was particularly wondering with the school if there can't be an outreach to the school district and see if they might do something about their parking lots as well. I'm sure the school has heard about the complaints of the high school parking lots.
Brought those into the department. They've can issue a request for trespassing.
Okay. We've had those discussions with school. Okay.
Yeah, we currently have a trespass letter from Flat High School. With anything like this, if it's enforced in this parking lot, they're going to get moved. They're going to go somewhere else. They've been going to Flat High School, and we already have a trespass letter in place while working with our SROs in the school district.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Dahlman?
Do we know if there's any ride share, cars being parked there like Mr. Russell was talking about?
Do not know that for certain.
I mean, I'm definitely for just lowering the time as per your suggestion. I was just thinking like if there were ride share people, 7 o'clock might be too short for them, but and what's happening at the parking lot right now, I think I'd probably rather take that risk about the ride share, but I just didn't know if you had any information on if there were people using it for that purpose. So thank you.
Fisher?
Thank you. If I have this right, this is mainly headlights disturbing the neighborhood, parties, hangout type thing. Any need for speed bumps in there? Is that part of, I have never really gotten that. They can't really do a whole lot in there as far as speeding to have a little more control.
Yeah, it'd not be our intent to install any type of
Okay.
speed bumps.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I went down there this last weekend a couple times, but apparently I was there too early or something. I didn't see anybody in the parking lots, except I did see, like you were mentioning, there was a rideshare guy sitting there, probably waiting for somebody to come out of one of the apartments or whatever. And you know, I've been thinking about this all week, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we did is be consistent, right? So if we're going to have, you know, some parking lots at 11, some at 7, that might get a little confusing to people if they're used to going to parking in another parking lot. But I was also, you know, I'm not sure how you have an effective sign that lets them know it's okay to park here if you're parked here for an event, a school event or whatever, right? Without getting a really long-winded, hard to read sign. They're going to see that 7 p.m. thing right away. The number stands out. And, you know, I was just kind of worried that we might be shooing people off that are trying to go to an event. And, you know, but back to the times of the events, I've been to like track meets there that last until 10 p.m. You know, I mean, there's some events are longer than others. Football is another one that can go long. But, you know, I've been trying to think of an effective way to do this. And it would be okay if it was 7 o'clock, but I don't want every single parking lot to have a different time and people just to be generally confused.
That's why this discussion is here. So we're aware there's going to be a difference of consistency across some of our parking lots. And in terms of the signage, that's why you have signage there, and it may change and it may move to something more effective depending on feedback we hear. But, you know, the main component is that initial signage, and that initial expectation is that it end at, say, 7 o'clock.
Jed?
Thank you. How much was invested in this parking lot for?
I'd have to get that number back to you, Mr. Fisher.
This is part of the Airport Road TIF thing that we did, right?
Correct.
If we do change hours, we all know how busy our police department is with much bigger things. I think those concerned in the neighborhood have to understand if somebody can't get there right away, that is just going to happen. You guys have bigger fish to fry. That being said, if we go to 7 o'clock and the public help pay, there was some public and local dollars invested in this as well, correct? In addition to the money that was available from the grant or what have you.
Well, those tax increment financing.
Okay.
So those are local dollars.
I get it. I get the neighborhood, but I think consistency is a problem. I think it's going to be very difficult to enforce. I think that's going to be a nightmare for our police department.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. How would it be any different than enforcing after 11 p.m.?
That's a very good point. Good point.
Gabriel?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think we're making this too hard. I think if there's a sign that says event parking only after 7 p.m. or something along those lines, so people are clear they can only be parked there if there's an event. I think downtown's a completely different animal. You have restaurants, you have bars, you have hotels, you know, so people are coming and going on Main Street, but there's no reason for anybody to be in that lot after 7 p.m. unless they're causing trouble or they're at an event, really. So I think Mr. Russell can help us wordsmith that, or perhaps the chief, so that it's clear to people that unless they're there for a school event, because really there's no other events down there, are there? Other than school events?
Yeah, none that we're aware of. But again, we'd keep that flexibility going. And what we don't want to do is have signage that creates ambiguity in enforcement. It was like, well, I am here for a school event, you know, and use a loophole to get in. So we'd figure something out in terms of what's going to occur.
And then I would assume then that KPD would know when there is a school event. So they're going to know, okay, there's a speech and debate tournament this weekend, or there's a football game, or there's whatever. They're going to know that there's something happening that evening. So I don't think it's going to, as hard as we're making it. Thank you.
I understand that, the school resource officer, their hours and duties to where it's more on that realm instead of police enforcement. What are the hours of the school resource officer and his ability to make any enforcement happen at a parking lot?
They typically work during the day, during the school hours. So they wouldn't be, it'd be patrol. Wouldn't be the school resource officer that's monitoring it.
Thank you.
Sam?
Thank you. So I like the sign idea. I think that's a good time. I'm going to take one other little totally different tract on this. We know that it's going to happen and we know that there's an issue with lighting and sound. Would it be feasible along First to plant a row of shrubs within the grass area to kind of muffle a little bit of that sound and at least lessen that impact of light?
I'd have to get back to you in terms of
Okay.
our plantings
I'm
along there and
okay.
the trees and the spacing. Typically wouldn't plant shrubs that
Okay.
would be at that height to muffle the sound, but
Sure.
let me get some more information back
Okay.
to you on that.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the inconsistency part of it, I mean, it's all over the city and different areas of town have different uses. And like you had mentioned, downtown has different, closing times. One of the things is we're talking about the use of public space, the appropriate use of public space. That is certainly, parking lot was built to have a certain use for it. A couple of years ago, we shut down the pavilion for inappropriate use. That was inconsistent with other pavilions. It was shut down, others were not. I can certainly go through and see moving this to 7 o'clock, when there's not an event going. I mean, it makes sense to me. And as far as law enforcement goes, them being able to police that. I mean, I would imagine, there's going to be calls coming in about whether or not people are hanging out there doing their, what they were doing. But I guess that's where I'm at with it, is the 7 o'clock, maybe 8. I don't know. It's 7 o'clock. I mean, now we're just into kind of semantics here. So, but is there anything, Ryan?
Yeah, I'd say I'm also not too concerned about the inconsistency, but the mention of ride share. Feel like a parking lot like this is for kind of large events. A lot of people, ride share doesn't kind of rise to that level, I think, at least at this point in our community. And we don't have paid parking in the neighborhoods, and there's plenty of spaces. So if somebody really wanted to do ride share, needs space, after hours, there's plenty of paid places not too far away where they could park their car for that. And then I would just say, yeah, I support 7 o'clock and move forward with that. And then we'll see how it goes and see how implementation goes. If there's still a problem, maybe we come back and see if there's other options available.
Sid?
So, one of my concerns about this is, we changed it to 7 for that one. We're displacing them somewhere else. They're going to go somewhere else. So let's say they go to another public parking lot that has the 11 p.m. thing. So I'm just kind of worried that we're going to be chasing them around, changing parking lot by parking lot to different times. And a sign is great. I think that eventually it'll work. Initially, it's not going to work. The reason that it will work is if we enforce it at the same time, right? So we'll have to put kind of like a focus on that for a short period of time till people get the word, right? I also noticed that at times buses will park there, like the school buses that come from other places. They'll park there while they're waiting for the kids to get out of an event. But in that case, they'd be covered by the event, right? There's events that happen in town every weekend night, at least somewhere. So, I could see somebody trying to stretch it and say, I'm here for an event that, is happening halfway across town or whatever. So those are just some of the concerns that I thought of. I don't have a big heartburn about changing the time. I do have a heartburn. I wanted to go talk to some of the people that were involved down there. So I could say, hey, do you guys know we're having an entire city council meeting about you and this parking lot, right? And, I think having some communication that goes out with this as well is pretty critical. Now, we can put it up on the website, but we have to have some way to draw people there to know that this is changing, right?
So I think real quick, to that, I went by there, drove in there. There's a lot of black marks. That makes a lot of noise. And I went by there one time. It was about 10 o'clock. People were parked there. That was fine. But there are houses that are houses and apartments that are very close to that with that kind of activity, it is going to be very loud. And I trust public comment for what they get up and say, even when they're not sworn in. But, we have one individual coming in here, but, there may be others that want to come in, but, we've seen it. People are a little timid about coming in here and doing this. So, and it could be especially with what the use that's happening too. So there may be a little bit of intimidation for some of the other individuals that live around there for coming and speaking. So anyhow, Sam.
Oh, no, you got it.
Another thought I had is, 7 o'clock in July still feels like it's the middle of the day, sunny and stuff. In the wintertime, no big deal. It's dark. It's nothing's going on. I'm just also thinking what time I would prefer to see there. Obviously, the intent is to curtail this activity without imposing undue, stress on the rest of the public that's using it as intended. So I'll be considering times as well. I don't know if I agree with 7 o'clock, but definitely an earlier time would probably help eventually curtail the activity.
So I guess it sounds pretty clear.
Well, so I guess here's the question. Does anyone object with us modifying the management of that to 7 o'clock?
No.
No.
That's the only direction I need.
Okay, there you go.
I'm still thinking about it, but I'm willing to listen.
Like I say, we can modify it as it goes on to see if it creates problems or issues. And we can do that without, just as we get them into the city and say, okay, this is something we hadn't thought of. And just, okay, let's modify that and change it. But it was enough of an issue, really, because a lot of it has to do with consistency and a lot has to do with the use of public space, what it was there for or not. So we'll move forward with the change of the management of the hours of it and see where it goes and see if anything needs to be modified after that in the future.
So are we only talking about 2 signs that on the entrances of both those, or is there more signs that I didn't see when I was over there?
Pretty sure they would be on the entrance to the facility.
I think there's only one on the parking lot in question, and there's one to the north that we would need to also even out, right? So
Because you have to have signage to have an enforcement.
Yeah, probably 2 signs, right?
Well, I think you're going to have 2 entrances into the one lot. So
So I didn't hear that.
you're probably going to have 3 signs.
Okay, and that's fine.
We'll figure it out.
As many entrances. I just was looking at the costs and see what we're looking at.
Minimal.
With our sign department, since we don't have to order signs, we can make them. I'm sure it's a little bit more cost effective.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it being overly burdensome to create a couple signs. It's a good thought, if you have to order them out. That's why, we can be pretty flexible in our land use because we can change them and reuse a blank and create additional signage later on if need be.
I guess the last question I have, is there any public notification that we have to give out if we're changing times and stuff like that?
Notification will be on the signs.
Well, I understand that, but it might be a shock to somebody that drove there and then sees it's not 11 anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, just thinking about it.
So these signs won't be made of paper plates.
You made a what?
Official. They won't be made of paper plates. They'll be official.
We'll see what we have for blanks. I don't make the signs myself. I just follow what they say.
All right.
I don't think we've made any out of paper plates. Hey, we're resourceful.
My daughter can volunteer
Yeah,
sign.
Crayola.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll plan on moving forward in that direction then.
Okay. Moving on to impact fee discussion.
Yeah, Council President, members of the council. Again, this is really tonight really kind of a policy discussion of where council wants to be. We do have to update our impact fees on a regular basis, and initially did it last year, but then we had some shifts and obviously had the levy pass, which impacted some of the cost centers. So waited and did updated capital planning for especially the fire department because that had the biggest impact, because our fire department impact fee is based on those capital assets. Really, an impact fee is a 10-year asset or longer. So, covers an engine, an apparatus that's going to be there for 10 years, buildings, and those are the things in there. I think we had 3 items in the fire impact fee. Station would be the 4th station in this 20-year horizon, engine for it, and another wildland interface apparatus that would all go to support that new growth. The police impact fee is based on space analysis because they don't have those capital items that are a 10-year lifespan or longer other than the building. So theirs is all built on additional space needs component. So a little bit different calculation for that. As you can see in the memorandum, the recommendation on the residential unit for law enforcement is 192 and for fire is for 782. When these were last approved in 2015, council chose not to raise them at that time to the allowable. And they've been at that level probably since closer to maybe 2010 at that current level. Again, that's a policy decision. Council is allowed to implement that allowable cost. You can't do more, you can do less if you want, but that is all entirely a decision as to what policy council wants to have. In terms of the reports, they're included in there, but they're built just on a formula, same formula we've used for years, again, based on space for law enforcement and the capital needs for the fire. Again, looks at a 20-year horizon and the growth rate over that 20-year span and how those calculate into the expected growth you have both in that and in the commercial based on the historical trends. So we're happy to answer any questions council wants, but probably more just to start that discussion of what council wants to do with the impact fees when it comes for action.
Council? Sid?
So I was on the Impact Fee Advisory Committee briefly, and I was very dissatisfied on the mission of that group because basically they were calculating what is the maximum amount of impact fee that can be put on these different areas without going into like an analysis of what we need. They were just basically telling us what the max was. I think that works out a little bit differently for water and sewer than it does for police and fire. But is that basically the feedback we're getting in our reports is basically what the maximum amount is allowable or what?
Well, it's based on that estimated need. We'd anticipate a 4th station being needed in that 20-year planning horizon. Gonna have to outfit that with apparatus. So, they looked at those and, come up with, and that's what they're adopting. They're adopting the entire plan, which includes those capital improvements. Same thing from a space analysis with law enforcement. That is we anticipate that we're going to grow and that need is going to grow in the community over that 20-year span. So they use, those averages across other communities, averages on our historical needs. So they look at those needs and what they're going to be in terms of the impact fee report, and then they adopt the report in totality. Does
Yeah.
that answer your question?
It does. And we're going to hear from them at some council meeting. Is that correct? Or are we just going to get the report this year?
Well, the report is what they're adopting. And
Sure.
I think it's safe to say that, and I asked, Jordan was at the meeting when they adopted it and said, you know, their recommendation is the report with the allowable impact fee to go cover
Gotcha.
those costs.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong at any time, Chief.
Yeah, the advisory committee, it was pretty clear that their expectation was the highest amount as far as what they felt would be necessary to keep up with the needed growth.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I'll also use a brief moment here to once again display my dissatisfaction on impact fees in general. They are extremely limited use. You know, if you go back before the state adopted a mandatory impact fee, we had hookup fees, which we could use for a lot. I mean, with hookup fees, I think they went into the general fund and we could use them if we needed another officer, right? Is that,
I don't think that,
you don't think that?
because usually anything
Well, I
you
know we could
charge,
use them for a lot of different things than the state allows with impact fees.
yeah, anything you charge to a utility usually has to stay within that utility
Gotcha.
or have, you know, a nexus to go out. So, honestly, I think the impact fee route is better because it is more of a clearly defined use. And when you're putting that fee on a payer, you know, that has a definitive thing as to what it's going for and what is being caused by that respective build. So if that had that vague component in it of being able to be used for different things, that may be the very definition of why impact fees are there, is to have that more clearly defined rationale for why a fee is being charged.
Sure. I understand there was probably wild differences between the cities prior to impact fees. I just think we lost a lot of flexibility when it was narrowed down to just a small range of things that we could use it for. But any case, that's more of a tirade. I can't change it. And you know, I'll look forward to reading the report in totality because a couple of days wasn't enough to do that. Appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you. So patrol cars don't qualify for, they just don't last 10 years or?
Right? They don't have the lifespan.
Yeah. Okay. And then with water and sewer impact fees, if we don't raise the fees, then we raise the water and sewer impact, the water and sewer raise to cover the difference. With police and fire, if we don't raise to the maximum, is that general fund then that's coming in to make up the difference?
Well, any sources we can find. You
Any
know,
source.
for example, we've used general fund dollars. We've now have a levy. We will look for grants to even offset that. For example, on the station, we'll look for the CDBG Community Facilities Grant to offset that as well. But there's not a rate component as there would be with water and sewer to come in and make up that potential shortfall.
So if we look into the future of some of these needs that we have, and we're looking at what, you know, potentially we'd bring in with the higher rate versus if we did something lower, and we think about at least what's available now in terms of grants and other funds, would we anticipate that if we didn't do the maximum rate, we would have to likely do the general fund or some source of taxpayer that's not like a federal grant?
So and I'm taxing my memory. I'm pretty sure I had this statement back in 2015. Did not go back and watch the meetings to verify it. But I'm pretty sure that similar question was asked. And I think my response would have been, if you're charging less than what the calculation component is, you're probably going to end up having to go out for a bond or for a levy of some sort, because the cost of a new station or of that significant nature, that you're just not going to be able to pick that up. Well, I mean, we're seeing it within the shop complex. It's not like you just have those extra several millions of dollars hanging around. You're going to have another revenue source, which is what we saw with, you know, preparing for the future with the fire station number 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's the crux of the issue for me. You know, I'm not interested in milking developers for fees or, it passing on to whoever buys into the new development. If I could keep those fees as low as possible, I would. But the flip side of it is if we don't do this, then somebody else is paying for it. And I believe that people who benefit from the new development, the growth, should be the ones contributing to the cost of that, whether it's the developer or the people buying into the development. And so, if this was a zero-sum game and you can lower it and there's no consequence for that, I'd do that. But in this case, and with all the impact fees, there is. And so I'm for, in this case, I think these maximum amounts are reasonable. And I would go for that. Sometimes where there is comparing to other cities and you want to not be outrageously out of whack with what other cities are doing, you may choose to do a different rate. But and in this case, I know a lot of cities don't seem to have police and fire, but I think it's reasonable to say there are impacts to our police and fire from new growth. It's reasonable to have fees to try to recoup some of those costs to pay for it. And so, yeah, I would support doing the full amount.
I think the one thing maybe to push back on that with is, obviously we get into this is policy. So, and I wanted to point out the impact fee committees, sets the numbers. They don't set the policy. So that's what we do. And the difference, Ryan, with what you're saying is it's about with the lower number, you get more paying in. So you can go through and say, well, the math goes through and shows that when you have a higher price for the impact fee, you're going to create more money. That's going to be dependent on where you're at, with construction and stuff. How much of that's coming in. If you're charging the max rate and you have less coming in, you may end up at the end of the day having less money in the budget. Coming into
less
the
units. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying if you have less units getting built at a higher rate, you may end up having less money coming in. So what you've done is you've stifled that growth, which we all know we need for housing. You've stifled that growth and you've not collected the money that you thought you would have collected. I think that's obviously the difference of opinion in the policy debate, where that comes into. Police and fire impact fees have never really given me a lot of heartburn. It's the other ones where it can really go and snowball into a lot of costs for projects when you're trying to do your best to go through. And it's one of the only things we can do as a council to keep costs down when you're trying to go through and keep the cost per unit down so that we can create these units. Developers can create these units because we're having the housing supply shortage. So it gets in, there's a lot of different facets of this conversation, but Sid.
Thanks, Mr. President. So I agree with you 100%. The sewer and water impact fees, much more, the dollar amounts are much higher for developers. And, the people of Kalispell have made it perfectly
It's
clear.
the end user.
Say again?
The end user.
Yes. The people of Kalispell have made it perfectly clear that the last thing we cut, are police and fire, right? That we have a focus on that right now. The levy passing showed us that. But you bring up, both of you brought up the same point that, when I look at impact fees in today's environment, I'm almost completely focused on the unit price and what that's going to mean, because we're trying really hard to catch up on our housing here so we can lower costs across the board for everybody. So, I'm very cognizant of what that means if we raise impact fees for whatever, and it's going to end up just being passed through to the buyer, which is what's going to happen. So, there's a little bit of a tightrope to walk on that. So, but I think we still need to remain focused on, we want to be the city in in the Flathead Valley that is doing as much as we can to get the supply of housing so we can drive down costs, especially of rentals for young people, right? So, and for people on a fixed income. So yeah, I think about that when I think about impact fees. But once again, if we go back to what we're focused on tonight, fire and police impact fees, I think we should do our best to support what we're going to be needing for growth.
Sam.
So I guess one thing that I'm thinking about when you talk about the cost, right? That's the direct cost. What's the indirect cost? When you inflate what the price of that house or that unit is to sell, what do we all do when we go sell a house? We go get a realtor and they do comparables. They compare it against an inflated cost that is added in that impact fee on top of that. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
High tide
Right.
raises all boats, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So you nailed it of why I don't really like a lot of impact fees, because it is inflating that cost for everybody in a high inflated price already. So just a thought.
Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I point well taken. I do think that there is, amount at some point where you get where it's too high, right? I mean, where it just becomes so, burdensome that it causes a problem. I don't think this is the case with the police and fire impact fees. And I didn't think it was the case when we were looking at water and sewer and cutting them in half. I obviously disagreed with that. But I do think there is a point where it gets so high that it becomes a burden and can have those consequences. So, but I looked at these numbers, and when you think about, houses in the valley and they're going for 600,000 or so, and that's for the single residents and units and stuff. And I just calculated these prices. I'm like, yeah, this is,
Pretty small.
it's pretty small, so I'm not too worried about it.
And I think it's next year we look at water and sewer. Is that correct?
That sounds familiar, because we'll want to get through the facility plan first.
Yep.
So we know what capital is going to be related to it and what the modeling will show as to some of those prioritized projects that would be upcoming. So you'd be looking at that after the facility plans are done, which we anticipate this year. So I think you're going to be correct in next year coming back before.
Yeah. And those are way more impactful. Pun intended.
We really just kind of wanted to get the conversation going, which is kind of, so if there's no other questions, what we'd probably do, and not bring it back next week, but give a little more time for people to sit on it, maybe on that first meeting in June, have it on that agenda for potential action. And that way, if council has questions as you go through the report and see stuff, have some additional time to bounce ideas back and forth. So we'll tentatively plan on June 2nd for when this comes up for action before council at a regular meeting.
I can't remember. Do we open public comment up at work session?
No, not
Like,
yet.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you just have to have it before action's taken, but typically we just do it at the end of the agenda items and you open it up for anyone that wants to. So you're more than welcome to open it up.
yeah. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I kind of think maybe I messed up there before. So I was going to go ahead and open up for public comment if there's any public comment. Step to the mic with your name and address.
Hello, my name's Arthur Fretheim. Address is 249th Street East. I'm on the impact fee committee, and this is my first meeting, so I was kind of figuring it out myself. And one thing I know the committee chair did want to be able to talk to you guys. I think he just couldn't make the meeting because of scheduling, so maybe he may make that June meeting. I just wanted to mention something. I think a lot of stuff's been covered that was talked about already, but that nobody mentioned, and that was the ratio in the impact fees between housing and business and the rate at which those are done, because it's not a constant rate. There's three separate rates for individual houses, for apartments, and for business, which is based on the square footage. And one of the things I noticed when I was trying to do, go over the reports myself, is that not only did whenever it was done last, I think it said 2015, but might have been the fire impact fees are about 45% of what had been asked for at the time. And that was across the board for all three categories. The police impact fees actually varied in a very between like a sixth and a seventh of what was asked for. And I tried talking to people, and obviously that was a council policy decision at some point. I don't know why that decision was made. It seemed kind of arbitrary. So at the time that was adopted, the police impact fee was set the lowest relative to the police impact fee for businesses was set the lowest relative to the maximum allowable out of all three categories. So they were paying the least relative to the amount of impact they generated for our police officers. And like I say, I don't know that was. But I did go through, and you can do this on your own calculator if you have time at home. And if you take those ratios that they use and you say, a sixth or a seventh or whatever, and you go through and you multiply each of the recommendeds by that number, you'd see that it would actually be different. So I would say, I mean, obviously we're endorsing the report as is, but even if for whatever reason you're not the council decides not to go ahead with increasing the impact fees overall, I certainly think it would make sense to look at adjusting them so they are proportional. So one of the things was that, and this sort of surprised me, it didn't surprise me so much for fire, but for police, that a majority of the impact was now coming from business premises and not from residential, either kind of residential. It was like 51% from business and 49% for residential combined. And then I think it's worth noting that if they had adopted the maximum fee last time, and this is like, it would have been about 100 or so for police, like 500 for fire, if I remember right. I'm just off the top of my head, but obviously you can look at the numbers. And then you'd look proportion, and then adopted that again this time. It would actually be going down for housing, relative to if it had been maximum last time, you'd be looking at getting a cut in impact fee for new housing this time, even if you adopted the maximum again. I mean, like people have said, I don't want to make housing more expensive. I am a young person. I know what it feels like to be shut out of it, but like people say, it's not, these ones aren't a huge amount. And on a $600,000 home, with the way that prices are negotiated, I don't know if that, $100 would even be noticed in that negotiation. But yeah, just something to think about, and have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
Do you mind if I address
Sure.
those? I would just say, you don't want to create the fee over what you wish it said by adjusting the proportions. That's why in state law, you evaluate them on a regular basis, because things change.
Mhm.
And when you start trying to arbitrarily adjust proportions, that's when you are effectively going outside the adopted report and the data from it. That's why, if you don't want to adopt the full amount, that's why it's best just to do it as a percentage for all different categories, instead of trying to adjust ratios just from a legal standpoint of treating them all in that equal component. So that makes sense. That's why, on the water and sewer is 50% across the board. Well, it's a defendable thing. You're not doing it 40% for residential and 10% for commercial. That would likely lead into some potential problems. So just trying to address one of the things as it relates to ratios.
I'm here again. My name's Dale Bowles. My contact information is on my April 1st email to all of you. I hope Chief Venezio got that too. Anyway, I think I can answer a few of the things that you mentioned in your comments on the parking lot on 18th Street. And just so the chief knows, my wife and I have been out there observing every night for 8 weeks now. We see what's going on. We have made many, many calls, and I'll send you an email about a couple things that I think would be really helpful, just as suggestions. But I think your comment about the event, that the wording of it, event parking only after 7 p.m., trespassers may be cited. May be cited, and that's at the discretion of course, the police department to do that. But that's just a suggestion. But event parking only after 7 p.m., trespassers may be cited. Now, it's interesting that most of the offenders seem to have scanners. They have scanners. So when I call in, usually 5 to 10 minutes, they're gone because they get the scanner information. So if I'm there and I call something in, then if they leave, I call back to dispatch and say they've left. Not a problem. But that's usually after 11 o'clock. We're there usually, now it's lighter later, so we don't usually get there until 9:30 because the perpetrators usually get there when it starts getting dark, and they'll stay there or they'll leave people in the parking lot and go party, and then they'll come back. And if there's nobody watching, they may do burnouts either in the parking lot or on the 17th Street or on Airport Road or First Avenue. We've seen that happen. The problem is, how do you identify them? Many of them don't even have front license plates, which is an issue. How can a normal person get a license plate if you're in the front of the vehicle and they don't have a license plate? It would help if we had, if that could happen. And the offenders are big, tall, black trucks. Those are the ones that do most of the burnouts, with the 3 lights in the fender wells, everyone lights on top, lights on their side mirrors. And I don't even think that's legal. But anyway, and it's easy to see many cars are there for an event. You know, if the patrol comes by and they're just regular street cars, it's easy to say these people are there for the event. But if it's a big truck all jacked up or it looks suspicious, then they may take action. So I think all that's under the perusal of the police department. Interesting point, turn off the lights and save money in that parking lot. You don't have to have the lights on. The lights are on there 24 hours a day when the photo cells are working. So that's something you could save money on, because if nobody's going to park there, why keep the lights on? I'm just trying to save me some money, save you some money. Interesting point. There's a small lot, and when I distributed those pictures the other day, the small lot will hold 20 cars. 20 cars. And it's a small lot. It's got the same sign on it that says parking from 11 p.m., no parking from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. So if you want to allow that little parking lot for people that are working and stuff, that's okay, I think, because the big trucks can't get in there and turn around. The ones that are doing the damage and harassing the neighborhood are the big trucks. Most of them are black. Some of them are white. There's a red one. I've got license numbers for lots of them. But anyway, if that's an option for people that come in to work at 7 o'clock or something and they're not going to be back till later, the small lot would work for them. And you could leave that till 11 o'clock. Just a thought. But the big lot is the real problem here. And so normal workers can turn their car and truck around in that little lot. Big trucks can't. Oh, school buses, you mentioned that. School buses, that falls under event parking. So I don't see where there's an issue there. Falls under event parking. So if school buses are there half the night, you know what they're there for. And the police department knows that too. So there's really no issue here if they're there. And the sign says event parking only after 7 p.m. That's for an event. Interesting too, it should take less police action after the message goes out. When these guys know that they can't be there and they pass that on, there is going to be fewer reasons for police action. Right now, Chief Anicio has officiated more patrols in that area, and I appreciate that. There are some nights when there aren't very many, sometimes none at that time frame. But usually, especially Friday night, Saturday night, usually they're pretty good with that. But with this time frame change, it will make it easier for the police department too. And if there's issues and I'm there, I'm going to call it in. And also, not only are there homes there, in the backside on the south lot, that's a whole trailer park that's been there for over 50 years. And those trucks sometimes will back up right to that curbing and sit there and idle with those big trucks with low emission exhaust, high emission exhaust, anyway, loud. They will sit there and just idle. Now, if nobody's watching them, what do you think they might do when nobody's watching? They might do a burnout, they might wrap their engine, and 15 feet from them is the mobile home park. And right across the street from that is my fourplex, which is, they burned out right in front of the fourplex, right in front of me. And I turned it in and there was a police action on that. And that was good. But there would have been no police action if I wouldn't have been there and turned it in. The police do a great job, but if they don't see it, they can't do it. They have to rely on the public like me. But I've got to have information to give them or it's no good. That's just a fact. Also, one of the reasons why one of my renters moved out was the chaos in the parking lot. And then fall, winter, and spring, it's dark. And that's when these people do this the most. They don't usually do it in the daytime because you can identify their vehicles, easier to see the license plates. They do it in the evening and night. So fall, winter, and spring, when it's dark, the cockroaches come out, they do their burnouts, and then they just drive away. And nobody can catch them unless you're sitting there. So this 7 o'clock thing, I think, thank you, City Manager Russell, for suggesting the 7 o'clock. I think I wanted to not press it too much. That's why I asked for 9, but 7 would be wonderful. Oh, and there are three signs, by the way, that have that signage on it. There's one sign that's on the small parking lot that has the same sign that's on the big parking lot. The big parking lot has one sign about the 11 to 6 on First Avenue West. The other one is on, is it 17th Street or 16th Street now? 17th? It's on 17th Street. So those are for the big lot, those two. But there's the same sign on the little lot. So how you deal with that? You know, you won't have burnouts in there because there's no room. So that may be a good option for those who want to park their cars while they're working. And I'm guessing probably that the person that put the article in the paper today, which I've got comments from different people in the area saying, thank you, Dale. So it's appreciated right away that there is going to be, hopefully, something done. So he will probably publish something in the newspaper. When your decision is made, it'll probably be published in the newspaper and people will know. And the perpetrators will know too. So, and then it will take very little police action to keep that rolling to where you have very few perpetrators in that situation. And us being there for 8 weeks now, most of the perpetrators know I will report them. But if I don't have a license number or a way to positively identify it, because it's at the nighttime, there's nothing that the police department can do. So nighttime is the problem. And in the wintertime, fall, spring, 7 o'clock, it's nighttime. It's dark, or it's getting dark in that time. So anyway, thank you for putting up with me. I want to say thank you to each of you, and also Manager Russell, and also Chief Venezio. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any further public comment?
Hi, I'm Fran Tabor, 1245 3rd Street West. I was originally just going to watch tonight, but regards to the parking lot and difficulty of seeing things, nowadays, all kinds of surveillance cameras are extremely low cost and incredibly reliable, easy on a low cost basis to have recordings. And parking lots are notorious nationwide as a place of risk for people, especially when there are events going on, or if somebody is there isolated because that was just an easy place to pull over because their car broke down. There's all kinds of reasons for being in a parking lot alone or with the wrong crowd. And surveillance cameras would make identification and also would make it indisputable if somebody was behaving in a manner potentially reckless in a way that could cause harm to any small child who could be there. As was pointed out earlier, in the summertime, it is bright until quite late. Kids ride their bikes. They love to ride bikes in empty parking lots because they can do wheelies and all kinds of things safely in the parking lot. If there's a kid in that parking lot when somebody doesn't expect them to and they're going in at full speed, that kid is endangered. Surveillance cameras would eliminate 99% of the problem and would be very low cost. Regarding impact fees over the years, I have seen many housing developments started and stopped because the expenses ended up being too much. The anticipated buyers ended up not being as enough. Any little thing can put a development over the edge to stop it. So yes, they do make a difference. And the city does know that the moment a house goes up on the vacant lot, what happens to the income from the huge tax increase? And that huge tax increase should be figured in part of the impact fees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Any further public comment? Okay. Okay, I guess we're adjourned. Or go ahead.
City manager.
Yeah. We saw.
Then it's brief, next week, it'll be a fairly light agenda, but we do have the public hearing. So I think that will take some time and, that's, as we're looking at, the impact fees, that another reason to go ahead and move that to June 2nd, just to get a lot of public comment on the Safe Streets for All program. We're off on the 26th for Memorial Day. Do have the meeting scheduled for June 2nd. We'll have the impact fees there. And then June 9th is the hazard mitigation. So just a little calendar coming forward. I'm done.
Anything from council? No? It's Gabriel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to say that our community has been heavy on my heart since yesterday, particularly for Chief Venezio and all the first responders who had to walk into a horrific setting yesterday. So they've been on my mind. The family's been on my mind, and I just don't know what else to say. It's pretty awful. So thank you, Chief, and please let your entire crew know that we're thinking of them too.
Yes, I agree. So
I agree as well. I was going to say something, but I don't think I could have done it as well as you did.
Yeah.
So thank you to everyone. And I hope that we have the right things to support staff with what they have to go through in certain situations. And too, I'm sorry for the family, but prayers to you all.
Okay, we're adjourned.